The rain came down in cold sheets, soaking through Evan Carter's jacket. He stood outside his middle school, holding a cheap backpack on one shoulder and a cardboard science fair display that was starting to sag from the water. Cars kept pulling up, doors swinging open, kids climbing inside with their parents. Some laughed, some complained about the weather, but all of them had someone waiting. Evan checked his phone. 7 missed calls to Mom, 3 to Dad. No replies. His fingers felt stiff from the cold as he tried again, but the line went straight to voicemail. His breath trembled in the damp air, more from the knot in his chest than from the wind. The street lamps were flickering on, casting blurry halos in the rain. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Dad. "Man up. Find your own way." Evan stared at the screen until the words blurred. He didn't know if it was anger, embarrassment, or something heavier pressing down on him. He just knew it was too much to swallow all at once. He shifted the dripping project under his arm and started walking. The school faded behind him, replaced by long, wet streets. 5 miles. Each step sent a cold splash up his legs. He passed houses where warm light spilled from windows. The smell of dinner, chicken, garlic bread, drifted through the rain. Inside, families sat together at tables, laughing, talking. No one noticed the boy trudging past in the dark, soaked through, head down. Somewhere along that walk, with water dripping off his hair and his shoes squelching with every step, something in him changed. That night, he learned a rule his parents would never admit out loud. In his family, needing help was weakness. Vulnerability was something to be hidden. Years later, Evan would look back on this night and think of it as the day. Evan's father, Mark Carter, built a career in real estate by making himself look like the man who had everything under control. His suit was always pressed, his hair always perfect. He shook hands with a strong grip and smiled for photos like he belonged in them. At home, though, he believed in what he called tough love. If life was hard, you just had to push through. If you failed, it was because you weren't trying hard enough. He said these things like they were wisdom, but to Evan they felt more like walls. His mother, Linda, was the kind of person who could charm anyone at a dinner party. She smiled at neighbors, made polite conversation with strangers, and never raised her voice. Inside the house, she kept her distance. She stayed quiet when things got tense, slipping into the kitchen or pretending to be busy. She didn't argue with Mark, and she didn't step in when Evan needed someone on his side. Silence was her way of keeping the peace, even if it meant letting things hurt. Evan's younger sister, Sophie, was only 10 back then. Mark treated her differently. She was the baby, the one who got the warm smiles and extra care. She didn't see the same sharp edges Evan did. If Evan got a lecture for forgetting something, Sophie got a gentle reminder. If Evan was told to handle things on his own, Sophie was told, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." She was kept away from most of the tension, like a fragile glass kept high on a shelf. 14 years passed. Evan was now 26, working as a junior lawyer at a mid-sized law firm in the city. His days were filled with long hours, stacks of paperwork, and quiet lunches eaten at his desk. He was good at his job, disciplined, organized, dependable, but he didn't let anyone get too close. With colleagues, he was polite but distant, always careful to keep conversations short and safe. Smiles were small and controlled. He didn't go home much. Holidays came and went, but he found excuses: a heavy workload, a last-minute case, bad timing. The truth was, walking back into that house still felt like stepping into cold water. The air there made it hard to breathe. Then Sophie called. She was graduating from high school, and she wanted him there. She didn't just ask, she begged. She told him it would mean everything to her. Her voice over the phone was softer than he remembered, but steady. Evan hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no, to keep the distance he'd built. But Sophie was different. She had been the one person in that house who made him feel seen, even if she hadn't understood the full weight of what he carried back then. So he told her yes. He didn't know that the trip home would open old wounds he had spent years trying to keep closed. He didn't know that sitting at his family's table again would pull him right back to the night in the rain, and force him to decide whether. The restaurant was warm and bright, the kind of place with white tablecloths and soft music playing in the background. Sophie sat at the center of the long table, wearing her graduation sash, smiling as relatives handed her cards and small wrapped gifts. Mark sat at the head of the table, raising his glass for a toast. "I want to say something about family values," he began, his voice carrying over the clink of silverware. "In this family, we believe in hard work, in strength. We don't give up, and we certainly don't whine about life being hard." Evan sat halfway down the table, quietly cutting his food. He kept his expression polite, his eyes on his plate. Mark went on, smiling like he was about to share a favorite story. "I remember when Evan was 12. School let out one day, pouring rain, and he calls me asking for a ride. I told him, man up, find your own way. And you know what? He walked all the way home, 5 miles. Like a man. Laughter rippled around the table. An uncle chuckled. A cousin shook his head in amusement. Evan felt the heat crawl up his neck. His smile stayed in place, small and tight, but his stomach turned. That night wasn't a funny family memory to him. It was the night he realized no one was coming for him. He glanced at Sophie. She wasn't laughing. Her eyes were on him, a faint crease between her brows. The conversation moved on, Mark telling another story, relatives ordering dessert. Evan stayed quiet, pushing food around his plate, the laughter from minutes ago still ringing in his head. When dinner ended, people started standing and hugging goodbye. Sophie found Evan near the door. She leaned close so no one else could hear. "It wasn't okay," she whispered. Her voice was low but certain. "You should tell them." Evan looked at her, caught off guard by how serious she sounded. For years, he'd buried that night, told himself it didn't matter anymore. But hearing her say it out loud made something stir in him, something sharp, something tired of being quiet. He didn't answer right away. He just nodded slowly. That night, lying in the guest room at his parents' house, he stared at the ceiling and thought about her words. He decided he wasn't going to keep swallowing the past. He would tell them. He would finally say what he should have said years ago. He didn't know yet that the truth in this house went much deeper than that one night. The next morning, the house felt the same as it always had. Tidy, quiet, and a little too cold, even with the sun coming through the curtain. Evan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, while Mark moved around giving instructions. "Don't forget to take the trash out before you leave," Mark said, barely looking at him. "And the lawn needs cutting. I told the gardener I'd do it myself, but since you're here..." Evan didn't answer. He just sipped his coffee. Linda was at the counter making breakfast. She didn't look at either of them. When Mark spoke in that firm, bossy tone, she just kept her head down, quietly buttering toast. It was the same way she used to act when Evan was a kid, as if ignoring the tension would make it go away. The rest of the day followed the old rhythm. Mark gave orders. Linda avoided eye contact. Sophie tried to keep things light, chatting about her plans for the summer. But in between the small talk, Evan began noticing something he hadn't let himself see before. His parents hadn't just been strict. They had been neglectful. Memories came back like pieces of glass he'd stepped on years ago and never fully pulled out. The time his 12th birthday passed with no cake because Mark had too much work and Linda didn't want to make a fuss. The school play he was in, where he scanned the audience and saw only empty seats where his parents should have been. The fever he ran one winter night, lying on his bed shivering while they told him to sleep it off, instead of taking him to the doctor. In the afternoon, Linda found him in the living room, looking at an old family photo on the shelf. "You were such a quiet boy," she said softly. Evan set the photo down. "I had to be." Her hands tightened on the dish towel she was holding. She hesitated, then said, "That night in the rain, I wanted to come get you. I had my keys in my hand, but your father told me no. He said, he has to learn." The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just that his dad had left him out there. His mom had known, and she'd let it happen. "Learn what?" Evan asked. His voice was low but steady. Linda didn't answer. She turned and walked back into the kitchen. That evening, the family sat down for dinner. Sophie was telling a story about a class project when Mark interrupted, laughing. "At least you finished things. Unlike your brother, who quit baseball after 2 weeks because it was too hard." Evan looked at Sophie. She gave him a small shake of her head, as if to warn him to let it go. But he didn't. "I quit because you never showed up to a single game," Evan said. His tone was calm, but the air in the room shifted. "And because I had to walk there on my own while every other kid's parents were in the stands." Mark's smile faded. "Don't start with that again. You're not 12 anymore. You should be thanking me for making you strong." "Strong?" Evan leaned back in his chair. "You think leaving your kid in the rain is strength? You think ignoring them when they're sick is strength? You didn't make me strong. You made me silent." No one spoke. Sophie's eyes darted between them. Linda stared at her plate. Mark didn't raise his voice. He just set down his fork and knife with a soft clink. "If you're going to be disrespectful at my table, you can leave." Evan didn't move. He met his father's eyes for a long moment, the weight between them heavier than shouting could ever be. Dinner continued in complete silence, the only sound the scrape of utensils against plates. It was the kind of silence that didn't just master for the Nas really revenzu at Galley Fim Sif Power Game Session did lighting a ceiling out video when we're hurting at Merfan, or Silves, yes, left earths in the back, keeps in the dish, series to lifts out the nil. Now, if thinking that you're hearing out wobble of seeking a thunder. Hello, see if we can always get mouse long as you're right out. Let's see, tonight hearing the ears day. near in the end other knee. When he hadn't a listener, heard I'm the dame history. March see me came early. I him like that's net far to feel sitting blocking. Yes, so I'm asked your vet. Of Bowish and the never looks your vet. Head thirp sim your vet's away. And that's such as a winner. Selves in the vet basket and allow somewhere with me. Non, I can get alley rat and that's away. As a widow. Here, which steer must away else are your fit I bet folly. Her like turned in your seal my first is last time. That when it was more slam valve call. My name is Blosky. Make no one. Which lock up. Mom block up. Near in the desk lying and I seem felling the out, so I know and that. Her veil and it's selves. That's in the vet side. And I get side, but bagage the yogurt. Why give me what? Make them skype Neil Crumb. Roll for bringing it back. Why, there's a fish I has going as a Savalon you should Murph selves. That's in the vet. One. Her sister in the aim you should visit. Said but I it's. Her elgum at Ashcrum. That geller has cost no. Sashed in his hour each left in the vet. Nair Gerlahish. Oh, no safe see fuss. Red line or not again, McGinty. Fast net. He fuss self air knows that. Here's not the sarcophon or renogri. Where you're from not bangeth your vetter fat. Certainly dwells of selves. I know fly. Salks of steel fat nice. Surf crumb. Segoning of uma. No flying. So would I get it as it back. Bats in the dish. A silver. Naibish. Yes, and it must have. Therapy dickers net. Girl for night as he fuss. Her and it did and scanned it. Bang all with your vet. I thought my last did I hunt no doubt. So we shine now. That arguably, that's in the vet. My hair for hits, thank you. That house in the partial solution. Speaks at HD, miss, adventure of Murphy, in the fun or the fuss. We're friend at Sandal for miss. Shdeer, header, they hear if miss. Why, and ace the sashed in a mouth on you the hell off in the vet. Oh, surfing a bots, yummy, if you'll meet us now, fifi. Her still it's the now, but my smithy. That lost never had. Lamps in the dish. As the image that her nurse in the vet. I know flying this day. He'll fast this ish. Stomps out with it I got. It keeps her foot in my murph out. My house of ice. Foster and I were out sing it out. Why make you foot? After dinner, Evan found Sophie in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed with her bag still half packed. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. You're not alone, Evan said, standing in the doorway. If Dad cuts you off, I'll help you. With money. With whatever you need. You don't have to fight this by yourself. Sophie looked up at him like she was trying to see if he really meant it. You'd do that. I already decided, he said. I'm not letting you go through what I did. She nodded, biting her lip to keep it from trembling. Evan glanced around the room. Pack what you want for tonight. We're leaving. Sophie hesitated, but then she started folding clothes into her duffel bag. Evan went downstairs to get his own things from the guest room. He didn't bother saying goodbye to Mark or Linda. He knew they wouldn't follow him out. Minutes later, they were in his car, pulling away from the house. The lights from the living room faded in the rearview mirror until they disappeared completely. Evan didn't look back. For a while, neither of them spoke. The hum of the engine and the soft sound of rain on the windshield filled the silence. Then Sophie's voice broke through, shaky but clear. You're the only one who ever showed up for me, she said. Evan's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know what to say, but because the words hit something deep inside him. He thought about that 12-year-old boy, standing in the rain, waiting for someone who would never come. For years, he'd carried that moment like proof that he had to survive on his own. But tonight, driving away with Sophie beside him, he realized that wasn't true anymore. He had shown up, not just for himself, but for her. And in doing that, he had finally stepped out of the shadow of the boy who had been told to man up and walk alone. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. Evan buried himself in work, but the weight he used to carry felt lighter now. One afternoon, while checking his emails, his phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. It was a photo. She was standing in front of a red brick campus building, sunlight on her face, her hair pulled back, and the kind of smile that only comes when someone feels free. She looked happy in a way Evan had never seen before. He stared at the picture for a long time, then printed it out on his office printer. Carefully, he pinned it above his desk, right where he could see it whenever he looked up from his work. Later that night, sitting on his couch, he opened his contacts list. His father's name stared back at him from the screen. He didn't hesitate. With one tap, the number was gone. Evan leaned back and let out a slow breath. For years, he had been carrying the boy who stood in the rain that night, the boy who thought no one was coming to save him. He looked at Sophie's photo again, the sunlight frozen in that single moment. It took me 14 years to get my ride home, he thought. But I got us both there. Hey besties, thanks for watching till the end. If you liked Evan and Sophie's story of breaking free from a toxic home, make sure to like, share, and drop a comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, emotional stories. See you in the next one. where a girl's friends invited everyone except her to their trip.